we are bringing in the brains behind PuckPedia.com. It is our pal Hart Levine joining us, making his show debut as well. Hart, very much appreciate your time. Thank you. Can he hear us?
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be with you.
There we go. There was a little lag, but we're good. We're dialed in right now. I have been talking on this show for the last little bit, Hart, about how, the Oilers have an opportunity to accrue cap space throughout the season. And then I see the moves they made the other day, and I'm like, whoa. Why are they starting an LTIR? Because that kills your chance to accrue. Can you explain the logic behind what the Oilers did yesterday with the Wright and Savoy stuff and why they're starting an LTIR?
Sure. I would say they're starting an LTIR, but not really starting an LTIR. So they're capturing their LTIR pool. As you saw, they could sign a player in Wright to a very specific contract that was needed to get a really optimal within $50 LTIR capture. So they're setting their LTIR pool, and then they're kind of putting it aside, and then they're going to operate under the cap, accrue cap space. But this way, if they do need LTIR one day, they have had an almost perfect capture, as opposed to in season, if they have other guys injured, or they obviously wouldn't have the ability to just sign a new player to a very specific contract, they wouldn't be able to get such a close to optimal capture. So there's really no downside in what they did. They basically set their LTIR pool almost perfect for when they need it and put it aside. The only downside is now when they're under the cap, instead of accruing everything under 88 million, they'll be accruing everything under 88 million minus $53. So basically nothing.
So 2.5 beers at the home opener is what they lose in cap space, but I don't mind that. That's a decent little trade-off there. So just to be super clear on this, let's say we get to deadline day and the Oilers have been accruing all year and they have like $4 million in accrued cap space. They can acquire a player and then put Kane on LTIR and have access to basically his whole cap hit to acquire a player?
Yeah, well, basically Kane will already be on LTIR, right? So once they set him on LTIR, he's an LTIR player. So that means whenever they are going to exceed the cap, now all of a sudden now they're in LTIR and not accruing space. So yeah, they'd probably do it in 2 steps. Like they accrue all the space as much as they can, do a transaction, use up sort of like the accrued space, and then go back into actually using LTIR, and they could potentially have Kane. But again, if Kane's going to come back during the season, that doesn't really help them because they'd have to clear that space for when he is back. So really, I think this is kind of like an insurance policy, right? It's setting it up in case, first of all, let's just say they get a rash of injuries next month and they need to call guys up. They have a pretty good capture already for LTIR. And then also, let's say he has some setbacks and he's not going to be back during the regular season, then boom, now they have this extra cap space that they can use and go and get it. So I would say this is, setting their LTIR pool and having it kind of, if needed, break glass in case of emergency.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get the gist of this. The last question I have on this whole scenario is the Matt Savoy recall. Is there anything there with like the bonuses and stuff?
Yep.
Like, is there a reason why it was Savoy and not just like Raf Lavoie staying on the roster for another couple days?
Yeah, you nailed it. So when a team goes into LTIR, they have the regular pool, which is like the cap hit, and then there's a performance bonus pool. The way that the performance bonus pool works is, so whoever is on the roster when they go in LTIR, if they have bonuses, that goes in this pool. So then later, if a guy gets called up, if the team doesn't have room in the performance bonus pool for those bonuses, then it starts to chew up cap space. So Savoy has 1 million in performance bonuses. That means that if he was not on the roster when they set LTIR, if he was later going to be added to the roster while in LTIR, he would count an extra $1 million against the cap, right? So that's why you want him in if he was a player that was never going to be called up this year, it probably wouldn't matter. But because who knows what happens, maybe he'll be called up. You definitely want him and his performance bonuses included when you set LTIR, so that again, now when they send him back down, they'll have this $1 million performance bonus pool. And as long as they call up guys that don't have more than $1 million in bonuses, then it's just going to be the regular cap hit. If they were to call up guys that have more than $1 million in bonuses, then that difference would chew up their cap space. So short answer is yes, it's important to have guys with performance bonuses so that when you call them up, you're not going to chew up regular cap space by calling them up.
Okay.
Got it.
I think I got it too. That is actually, that makes a lot
You
of
guys
sense.
with me, or was that too much?
No,
that makes sense.
And the chat is with you as well. Christopher Palmer's in. This guy's smart. Goddamn. Brian is in and says cap management is mind boggling. And on the PuckPedia Twitter, you kind of went and laid out everyone's situation with their roster. And I mean, at this point, most of the league has their guys hired and has a process, whatever. And the answer to this might be no, but I'm just curious. Is there any team that as you were sitting there and going through everything, you were like, whoa, they fucked up a little bit? Like, did you catch anything?
I'm not going to say that. No, I mean, I would say I don't let that happen because I start looking at these rosters like a few weeks before, and then I start giving my suggestions to those teams so that they make sure that they know what I think, whether they're interested in my opinion or not, right? So, for example, I put out a piece last week where I was doing this, and I had a really good sense that Washington was going to waive and send down Ethan Bear. Is he an NHL player right now? Who knows? But I could just tell from how they had to set their LTIR with Backstrom that they needed to send a guy with a big cap hit down. So like I had a feeling that that would happen, right? So Montreal, for example, they did a bunch of moves. It took me a little time to unwind how they did it. It's maybe not exactly how I would have done it, but it's pretty close, and it's about the same. So I think that one makes sense. A team like St. Louis, actually, they maybe wouldn't have. That's one team where I probably would have done it a little differently. I would have had a guy like Dvorsky up because, to your point with Savoy, he has bonuses, and it would have let them get a little bit closer to a better capture when they put a guy like Krug or Sundqvist on LTIR. But it is like in a lot of cases we're talking like a few $100,000 or maybe even less. And again, when you're in LTIR, you don't accrue space, so we're talking $200,000. It's 200,000. It's not going to grow, right? So it's more like a game. Like I just tweeted out the LTIR optimization standard or capture standings, and that I know a lot of the cap guys, they really like that. They're competitive, and so they start like giving each other a hard time when I put that out every year, or they'll be asking me yesterday, oh, did I win, right? So it's more like for pride, but it's not really in a lot of sense like what's a few $100 or a few thousand. It's really doesn't come down to that very often. And
it was Toronto who did the best. $1. That is
$1. Carolina is at $3. So yeah, they're in there. Vancouver last year was at $0, which is the record. But a lot of teams actually, they when I put out, Vancouver won last year with $0, they'll say, we could have made it $0, but we like to give a couple dollars in case there's some rounding issues that we missed. We would never want to be $0 just in case. So, again, there's a lot of bragging rights on the line for capologists.
Can you explain just to our listeners and maybe me a little bit too?
You're asking for a friend.
Yeah, it's just for a few friends. How exactly does the accruing work? Like, what is? I do understand it on like the day-to-day thing, but it's way more complicated than just being like the others are going to have like $4 million at the cap, right? At the deadline.
Think of it like this. So the way that the cap works is every day we take a snapshot, and that's what actually counts against the cap. 1 out of 192 days worth of cap hit, right? And so let's say halfway through the season, a team acquired someone with a $4 million cap hit. Well, if you think about it, $4 million at half the days remaining, they're only going to hit the new team for half of that, $2 million, right? So it's really just that basic sort of math of fractions. Like, so the further out you get, when you acquire a player, it's going to use up less of your cap space, right? So we call it accruing cap space, and that's part of it, but it's really about how much a new player will use up of your cap space that you have. So, again, the Oilers, let's say they have $1 million of cap space. Well, that's when I say $1 million of cap space, we show on the website projected cap space. That's as if they made no moves, the season ended, they would finish with 1 million, right? But as time goes on, 1 million of kind of end of season cap space could fit more annual cap it the further we get into the season. So, halfway through the season, if I said the Oilers are projected to end with 1 million of space, well, at 50% of the season, they could add a $2 million guy, right? Because that's going to use up that half. 3/4 of the way through the season, right? They could add a $4 million guy because it's only going to use up 1 million of that space remaining. So I hope that makes sense, but it's basically just you're using fractions or prorating. And if you think about it, the main concept is when a new guy comes to the roster, he's only going to use up his cap hit times the percentage of the season remaining. And if you think of that concept, I think that helps with understanding how the space accrues and builds up.
Yeah,
that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, that really actually does clear it up. So again, right now on PuckPedia, the Oilers 952,000 in current cap space, projected to 4.3 million in deadline cap space. But let's say, like you said, they run into 3 injuries and have to use their LTIR pool to call guys up for a month. Then that's going to shrink that 4.3 million by a bit.
A lot, yeah. Because again, that the deadline space is taking that final projected cap hit number and multiplying it, by only having that little bit of the season left. But if they call up a guy in a week from now we're going to add almost a whole season's worth of projected space, right? So especially if they have to call up extra guys earlier in the year, that's going to really shrink down the potential deadline space because they would have less days of the season to build up that space. Hope that makes sense. And then when you look at the projected roster for the Oilers right now, that's because Cameron Wright was not officially registered yesterday. If you refresh probably shortly after we finish here, you'll see Wright's added to the roster. They'll have $53 of space. That's when they're going to put Kane to LTIR. And then today, they're not allowed to send anyone down because it's the first official cap day. So I would expect tomorrow then they send Savoy down, they send Wright down, and they sign Dermott. I tweeted out and reported he's going to sign a 2-way deal, it looks like. And so we would expect all those moves tomorrow. So their cap space will look a little different tomorrow. I think it's going to be about $1 million. I pull it up here. It'll be, they'll have about 1.06 million projected space probably tomorrow after those moves.
Okay. We got a couple of questions from the YouTube chat, and then we'll let you go. Trenton says, can you explain the Raff situation since LV just put him back on waivers? So the way to read this is if the Oilers claim him, Hart, they can put him, if they're the only team that puts a claim on him, they can put him right down to Baco, right?
That's the important thing. If they're the only team that puts a claim in, if anyone else puts a claim in, even if the Oilers win the claim, then he cannot go right down. So we saw that with Patera, went from Vancouver to Boston, then Boston put him on waivers, and Vancouver was the only team to put a claim in, so they could send him right down. And let's just clear up a couple misconceptions. The Oilers do not have first dibs. That there's no first dibsies. That doesn't exist. That's like what you do on the playground or something. There's no first dibs, and there's no requirement that you have to keep a claim player on your roster for a certain number of days. So that's why Vegas could put them on waivers today. Anyone that gets claimed, a team could put them on waivers the next day. There's no requirement to keep them on the roster. The only thing is if you want to send them down, a player must clear waivers. And in the case of like Lavoie, he did not clear. Vegas claimed him. So that's why they have to put him back on waivers again. Then again, the only special thing that Edmonton has is because they were the team that lost him, if they're the only team that puts a claim in, they could send him right down. And if you think about it, that's really just to like not waste time, because if they were the only team that puts a claim in, obviously nobody else wanted him. So why make the poor guy have to go on waivers again tomorrow, have everyone pass on him again, and then send him down, right? So it really is just to make it a little more efficient. It's not even really like that much of a benefit. I guess teams, if they didn't have that rule and then the Oilers claimed him and then put him on waivers again the next day, I guess teams could be a pain and want to mess with them and then put a claim in. But like you already know that these teams have passed a few times. So.
Yeah. And it's based off the end of last year's regular season standings.
For now,
so again, if any team before the Oilers, any team that finished lower than the Oilers in the standings, if they put a claim in, they will get him. If it gets to the Oilers and they put in a claim, which we're led to believe they are going to do, then they will get the player. And as long as none of the 8 teams who finished higher than the Oilers put a claim in, they can put them on Bakersfield, or Edmonton claims them, they get them. And if a Colorado, Boston, Vancouver, Florida, Winnipeg, Carolina, Dallas, or New York also put a claim in, then Edmonton would have to do you're going back on waivers again and probably going to one of those teams.
Yes, maybe going back to one of those teams, right? Exactly. Yeah.
The St. Louis Blues put in a claim, I'm going to be pissed.
I'm flying to St. Louis and doing something about it is what I'm doing. Danger Suede with the last one we'll throw your way. Does the NHL approve roster movement before they're announced to make sure it's cap compliant? Or do the teams announce and then go double check after? What's that process like? Do you know?
I guess a team can announce whatever they want, but they would look pretty silly if they announced and then it wasn't approved. But when teams submit their official opening roster, that goes through central registry, just like a trade or any contract. It goes through central registry. It gets approved. I'm sure some years there's some back and forth, and there's a lot of intricacies, especially there's things called season opening injured reserve, which has some nuances to it with certain cap hits. The Oilers have that with Yarventi. Robbie Yarventi's actually counting 107,000 against the cap right now while he's injured. They'll clear that once he gets healthy and is sent down. So there's probably some back and forth, but yeah, when the official opening rosters go through, it's already been cleared with Central Registry. And then basically any move that a team makes has to get cleared with Central Registry. So like a team can't make a move and then say, whoops, I can't get cap compliant right now. That's a very common question people send me is like, well, what happens if a team is not cap compliant? And the answer is they just cannot be not in compliance with the cap. They cannot make a move that would not put them in cap compliance. That would get rejected. So you can't make a signing, a trade, a call up, anything if it's not going to allow you to be cap compliant.
What's up, Nation citizens? If you like that video, then you need to be subscribed to the Oilers Nation YouTube. Podcasts, live shows, exclusive interviews, and analysis. Everything you need from your favorite voices at Oilers Nation. And you don't want to miss any of it, so hammer that subscribe button.